Hello, good afternoon from the UK, everybody who's joining us today for our Leo webinar, which is how to make learning games happen. Your questions answered. My name is Rich Calker. I'm kind of going to be hosting the webinar today with a few of my colleagues who I'll introduce in a second. So let's get started. I'll quickly hand over to my colleague Elizabeth to talk a little bit about who Leo is and who the Learning Technologies Group is.
Thank you so much, Rich. I'm Elizabeth Schrader. I'm actually a client engagement manager that sits in our US office, so I'm right outside of Raleigh, North Carolina. So a little bit today, I just want to say thank you for joining us. You are meeting with us today. We are from Leo Learning, but Leo Learning is actually part of the larger umbrella organization of Learning Technologies Group. So we've got a lot of organizations within the umbrella, but really what's important to know is that everything that you see on your screen right now is related to learning, development, human resources, diversity and inclusion, all of those areas of your business. Here at Leo, we specialize in working with clients and creating custom content. So anything from start to finish. So what I like to say to my clients when we start working together is, no matter where you are in the process, we can come in and support you and meet you where you are. So whether it be, how can we transform our learning program and how do we get started with that, all the way to how can I scale this program in my global organization, because we have a great program, but we don't know how to get it out to all of our employees. So I just always say it's very important to know with Leo that we specialize in learning and development. We can meet you where you are, and really anywhere in that journey from end to end, we can come in and support you. Back to Rich.
Great, thanks. So I wanted to introduce today's purpose, and really what we're trying to do is lift the lid on games development for learning games. So a bit of backstory is that around 4 weeks ago now, we ran one of our games workshops, a webinar where we talked about how to design games for learning, and we really focused in on the benefits of multiplayer games for learning and all the social benefits that they bring. And what we find when we do these webinars is lots of really similar questions coming up. It's people who are really keen on doing learning games. They're really keen on getting into it, maybe creating their first learning game for their organization, which is great, but we get lots of similar questions. And what we're here to do today is really try and just demystify the process and make things easier for people to get started. One thing that we are not going to look at today is the design of learning games, because there are loads of there's loads of existing resources that we've got, some of which have just gone into the chat box there for you if you want to have a look. We do webinars on games design quite regularly. We've done white papers and so on, and blogs. Today we're going to focus on the practical side, which is how to get them done, how to go from being interested in games and game design for learning into a place where we're actually going ahead and getting them done. So this is going to be a panel style webinar. So we're going to try not to just present to you too much. We're going to try and make this more into a somewhat casual conversation between the four of us about learning games and our experiences with them and answering some of these frequently asked questions that we get. So my name is Rich Calker. I'm a learning consultant at Leo, and I've got on the line with me as well my colleagues Zaki, Julia, and Elizabeth. You've heard from Elizabeth already, but Zaki and Julia, if you could just introduce yourselves.
Yeah, should I go first?
Yeah, go first. Please do.
Okay, cool. So my name's Julia. I'm also part of the Leo Learning team. I'm actually one of the program managers here. So I guess my role is really looking at the whole project life cycle. So I'm hoping to give some insights to that today. So I'm involved in all of the key stages. I get to see where maybe the difficult stages are, where the potential areas are that we need to look at, where are most impactful areas. And I also work with all the different stakeholders. So I'm hoping to speak to that today.
And my name's Zaki. I'm part of the Leo Technical Studio. So I work primarily out of the London office in the UK. And my role is to really engage with customers nice and early, understand their requirements, and help validate and support the implementation and design of that solution all the way through. So I'm involved kind of end to end in the software development process. So yeah.
Great. And you've got the four of us today because I think we have a breadth of experience across the different parts of a games project. So you're going to get different perspectives on the questions that we're going to answer. We as a collective have been involved with Leo's flagship games projects, some of our most ambitious projects in the last few years together. So we've got a lot of experience that we're going to bring to you. And the other thing is, as the four of us know all too well from projects, we don't always agree on things. So I'm really hoping that between the four of us, you'll get a nice broad view of of how to do games and answering these questions. So the format of today, we've got about 20 minutes to answer some frequently asked questions, which we'll show you in a minute. Then we're going to go into a few lessons that we've learned along the way. So using the benefit of hindsight to tell you some of our things that we've picked up, some of the things that we may not have anticipated when we started making games for clients, but some things that we think will help you. And then at the end, this is a really important bit, we're going to go into a live Q&A. So the opportunity is yours to ask any questions that you want to ask us. If you put them into the chat window so that everyone can see, Elizabeth is going to be monitoring the chat and pulling out some of the key questions. If there's some themes that keep on coming up, she'll pull those out and we'll talk about them at the end. So please do, if you have any questions that you want us to answer today, put them in the chat and we'll try our best to get to them. Just remembering that today we're going to try and focus mostly on the practical side of doing games, and as opposed to like the design of doing games, which we'll touch on in certainly in the future in other webinars, and we've got lots of resources that you can have a look at as well. So there are basically three big questions that we get asked all the time when it comes to games. These are the frequently asked questions. First one is, how do I get started? Second one is, how long do learning games take to make and how much do they cost to make? And the third one is, how do I get stakeholder buy-in? The first one, how do I get started? Well, I guess, guys, can I just go first?
You go first, yeah, go for
okay.
it. We'll give you permission.
Okay, thanks. So my answer to this always is work out what your ambition is for a learning game, and that means quite a few different things. So firstly, what is your when a client comes in and they say they would like a learning game, first thing I ask them is, well, how big is this thing going to be? What do you want it to achieve? And then really, the root question of all of this is, why are you doing the learning game in the first place? What is the learning objective? And when we get started with clients, as you guys know, we go through a consultancy process. We tend to do workshops with clients that go roughly in this order. So we start by asking, what's the vision? Why are you doing a learning game? How big do you want this thing to be? What content are we covering? What behaviors are we trying to get to? And then what form does that take? And then what kind of functionality does that solution have? So it's this kind of three-part consultancy process. And this is an example that you guys will know well from a previous client. So in fact, this was the consultancy process we went through across a week, where we were with one of our clients. We started the week with an insight session. We went through an art of the possible session, which is basically just throwing loads of ideas and at the wall and seeing what sticks. And then experience mapping into personas, really analyzing who the learner is and what the learner wants, because the most important thing is that you make a game with a player in mind. You can't just go about it obviously from this idea of, we just want a game, so let's make one and hope people play it. You've got to really go deep into who the players are. And so there's a whole lot of this.
What are some of the approaches you might use in order to start to elicit that information from us?
Well, one of the first things I like to do is persona mapping. That's a really important one. But then another one actually that I always like to do is this one, which is a phone call exercise. And so we put it to the client. What would, if you imagine if you could overhear or you could kind of tap into a phone call between with one of your players talking about their experience of the game, and what would you want to be hearing them say, based on their first week or their first ever play experience with it, or if it's a long-term play experience after 2 weeks, after 6 months, if it's a really long play experience. What would you want somebody to be saying about your game?
And I guess something that we do, I don't know if you remember, Rich and Zaki, when we went through this process, actually for this particular game, we did some stakeholder mapping right at the beginning. So what we did is do you remember, we looked at who are the people that we need to be part of this, who needs to be in these workshops, but who are the people that actually need to see the output of the workshop. So we really started to work out and refine that team, because it's not actually a case that you want everyone in there. There's particular people that are really critical, and then there's some people that actually just need to see the output because they just the sign-off point. And those sorts of things is an exercise that we did beforehand, and I think that kind of lines in with your visioning as well.
Exactly. Yeah. This is just some examples of, like I said, throwing stuff at the wall and seeing what's going to stick. Lots of just kind of game ideas that we throw in there and see what people like. And we also do this kind of activity where we're working out the ambition, the vision for the game is, do you want it to be serious or fun? If anybody says that they want it to be serious, then I run a mile. Games should be fun at the very least. But yeah, there's loads of questions, but basically it's a big, the place to get started, in my view, is just answering lots of questions, throwing lots of questions at the client through a consultancy engagement, and trying to kind of form a shape for what this game might be.
Yeah.
And this process is about essentially building consensus, right? Building a shared vision of that ambition.
Yeah,
absolutely.
And just to quickly jump on that vision part, so we've spoken about the game vision. Obviously, you want to be setting up the program and project vision. So how are we going to work together? And that could be simple things like meetings, communication, reporting, but all of that needs to, like the logistics, I suppose, is what we always consider at the beginning. So Rich, you will work on the game design, Zaki will look at the technology, and then I suppose I come in from the logistics, the project management side of things, and we'll all work on that together.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's really interesting from a technical perspective being involved in those sessions, because I know we're focusing around the game experience and the vision and the ambition of that actual gameplay experience, but I'm also trying to look at the user experience of the game in the customer's ecosystem, and it's a really good opportunity to start asking questions around, well, how does the user get to the game? What is that experience into the gameplay and things? And I think if we don't have a view of that user experience to the game, that's okay. That's part of the consulting process, is to help elicit that. But that's really important, and it's really valuable to start thinking about how this ties into the customer's ecosystem.
Yeah, definitely.
And then with that vision in mind and the ambition and the ecosystem, how do we want to tackle this one? How long games take and how much they cost? I guess, Julia, that's a good one for you.
Yeah, I think it can completely vary. It's something that we actually try and categorize, I suppose, in the next few slides. So we'll go through that in a second. But I think one of the key outputs of the consultancy phase is to get a grasp of the scope, and with that understand how long it's going to take. And actually there's some few different techniques that we can do to scale up and down the timeline. So maybe we could talk about those.
And I think that as we go through these, this is where I like to talk about, right? So when I meet with clients, everybody wants to know, how much will this cost? Tell me about the budget. And you're going to see in the next few slides, as Rich, Zaki, and Julia describe some of the game projects that we've worked on, that there's so many factors that come into play when we talk about cost. So you'll see that there's a lot of different levers that we can pull. We can do something that's within your budget, but just for reference, as we go through this today, I just like to lay the groundwork and say learning games can start anywhere on the low end of a budget of around $30,000. And when we get to the high end of some of our flagship games, these are going to be high six-figure engagements. And as the team describes the differences and the variety of games that we see here, you should be able to identify what's going to make some of that cost go up and down. So keep that in mind as we move forward, as these get more challenging and more complex as we go.
Absolutely. So yeah, I mean, Julia, you were talking about classifying different games projects, and this is one that I would definitely categorize as being a bite-sized game. And yeah, so I mean, I would call this bite-sized because it's a fairly short play duration. It's single player only. This is actually one of the favorite game projects that I've done because of I love the style of it. I love the artwork. It's kind of an escape room, but with a twist, because you know, instead of like finding a screwdriver to unlock a vent or something like that, you're solving puzzles. Like there's a whole string of connected puzzles, and you've got to take the power from one end of the cable to the exit door, you know, to power the door so that you can leave. It's quite a simple idea for a game, and the thing that I think is really cool about this is actually, in a way, not the design itself, but the way that we went about designing it, which is that we tried to make something that could hold almost any content. So we tried to make a design where you could, in fact, you know, the first game was a kind of a soft skills focus, and then the second game that we made with the same framework was more of a data focus. So I really, really like this game.
Yeah, and I think actually building that framework also makes it a little bit evergreen. So I think that was one of the requirements, if you remember right at the beginning, that we could then repurpose that framework every time, and it just helped with the cost as well, those sorts of things. And actually even the timeline, because I think the second game is therefore quicker for us to develop. So those are little techniques that we can do. I do remember with this one as well, we had quite a specific scope and timeline. So what we did is we looked at different ways that we can use the budget that we have and make it impactful.
Yeah,
Do you
like
remember with the animation?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I think the little guy in the background there, we actually animated him to grab the user's attention as they came in. So it's little things like that where we say we can't animate everything, but we can really look at the most impactful places to use the budget and scope. So that's something we did there.
Exactly.
One of the I was just going to say one of the things about bite-sized games from a technical perspective is it's normally going to be distributed within a known architecture. So the chances are it is the same kind of shell that we would use for a learning object. You know, if you were to deliver a SCORM object or an XAPI object, chances are this is how this is intended to be wrapped and delivered. And so it would sit within a customer's LMS or LXP. And you know, you would access it in the same way you might access content and things. When we get to some of the later slides, that there's normally a slightly different distribution architecture that sits around those things. So one of the things to know is that chances are this is a if you're moving from sort of gamified learning into the game space, this is probably the first step that most people take.
Beyond this, we're starting to look at more of a premium game. So this is an example of our game app Genius, which is a kind of quiz engine. This is a more of a medium-term play experience, so anywhere from like 20 minutes to an hour and a half, or in fact, even, you know, this game in particular is probably even longer than that. Actually, through repeated engagement. But this is where, from a learning and design point of view, you start getting into things like really cool game stuff like replayability and adding in some strategy. But the nice thing is, from a cost perspective, you know, with clients, is you can still use a semi-bespoke framework. You don't have to build everything from scratch in most of these cases.
Yeah, and I think in these sorts of games, we tend to follow agile development, whereas the game before, we did waterfall because of the specific date and scope and timeline. And I think the nice thing with agile is that we don't design everything up front. We don't set everything in stone. The idea is very much to kind of build block by block. So we do the consultancy piece, we get an idea for what direction we're heading in, but then we test it, we learn from it, we evolve our thinking, and then we build the next step, which is really, really nice. And it's a great way to actually run games, and something
it gives
that
a lot
works well.
like there's a lot of flexibility in that process, which is nice.
Absolutely. And you're basing your decisions on feedback directly from the learners and the users rather than assumptions that we're making, which I
Yeah.
think worked really nicely in this one, actually.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think the only thing to note is that once we move into this sort of premium game territory, it's often not the gameplay experience that changes too heavily from Bitesize. From me, it tends to be a lot around the sort of the analytics that we want out of the game, or the security that has to be wrapped around the game. Those sorts of things become slightly more sophisticated as we move into that premium game experience, because it's normally maybe it's multiplayer, and there's sort of security concerns around player data and things. So we start to think about those sorts of things as we grow in scope.
Yeah, and with that added sophistication, I suppose, Elizabeth, the typically the kind of costs that would be associated with this are rising from the bite-sized approach.
Yeah, absolutely. So as we go through these other games that are a little bit more complex, a few things that we're going to look at, as Rich has mentioned, when we talk about cost is, what does your tech infrastructure look at? You know, that's why we've got Zaki involved. Do we need to build something? Can we use something? Do we need to plug something in from our portfolio? The other thing is obviously going to be length. And then, of course, look and feel. We can do games that, you know, sort of similar to the bite-sized one, where it's maybe not as in depth in terms of the different nuances of the look and feel, but you can still have that game experience. Or something like, you know, with JLR Genius, where it's very in the details, it's bit by bit, there's a lot of information coming in. So the levers that we really look at when we talk about pricing games is going to be technology, length, and then of course the depth of the experience that you're looking for. So the higher those go up, that of course it impacts pricing.
Yeah, for sure. And then at an even higher level, this is where you're talking about flagship games. These are games where the design is much more complicated by virtue of the fact that it's a much longer player experience. So I think a few minutes ago, you know, guys, I was talking about saying that some play experiences. I think on that consulting exercise, what would you want to hear if a learner or a player was talking about your game in 6 months' time? And this is the kind of game where actually, yes, players are going to be playing this for that sort of long term, because there's just so much content. You know, like in this game, each one of those little dots represents a different learning scope. So it's kind of like a whole massive collection of learning and challenge and gameplay scopes, all kind of put in a modular fashion within this game. So this is where you're definitely, almost certainly talking about multiplayer games. You're talking about a very extensive content scope, a really almost, I guess, consumer grade sort of experience from a game. Lots of depth to it.
Yeah, and I think you actually start to scale up the project team as well. So you shift, I suppose, from one small project to a big program of work here. So for this one, I think we've been going for about 2 years, and we've gone from waterfall to agile to waterfall. Now we're in BAU. And I think that's actually a really important point. You don't go through the consultancy phase, come out with the ways of working, and that's it. It should definitely evolve with the project and the need. And I think that's something that we've done here, and it's been really fun to work on, actually. And every single time we're adding to it as well.
Yeah, and just to clarify, you said 2 years. It's not like we worked on it and launched it after 2 years.
Good call out. Yeah, it didn't take 2 years to launch at all. It's just that we've been adding to it. We actually were looking at the map here right back when we were starting, looking at all of the different games, and that's evolved itself. So yeah, it's because it's something that continually we add to, and actually that keeps the stakeholder buy-in alive as well. It keeps people interested and always wanting to come back and learn more, and it evolves with the company as well.
Being part of this one was really interesting, because actually, as you look at the map now, and if I cast my mind back to the visioning session that you ran, Rich, there was actually a board game that we had that the customer bought with them, and they pulled it out there and then, and it was about this kind of train tracks across America, right? It was really brilliant.
Ticket to
Ride. And now if you remember that vision to this, you can see how it's really developed.
Yeah, exactly. And also, I mean, because it's worth saying that what we're seeing in the screenshot is a just one part of a very large game. There's an awful lot that we wouldn't be able to we wouldn't be able to put the game on a slide because it's huge, and which is why, you know, the cost is what it is and why we call it a flagship game. You know what I mean? I guess, Elizabeth, is there anything that you would want to call out from a cost point of view on this?
No, I think we're just back to, this is, again, it just comes down to the depth. This is a game where essentially the client wanted to take their entire LMS ecosystem and they wanted to convert every module into a game. So that's something that we're continually partnering with them on. So as Rich mentioned in the beginning, ambition, right? This is very ambitious to say we've got an entire catalog of learning and now we want to take it all and reimagine every module as a gamed experience. So this is a very in-depth program.
Yeah, this was gamifying a whole curriculum. So obviously the ambition is very high, but you know, you don't have to go that far to have a really nice experience. And one of the things that I want to make just so clear is that if a client is at the very start of their game, their learning game journey, you know, if a client is really interested in just dipping their toe in the water, you know, and having a go, they can start at gamified e-learning, which is a much more cost-effective way to do it if you don't have that kind of grand ambition of, you know, for example, gamifying a whole curriculum. You know, you can start small, and this is where you're basically adding small bits of learning, small bits of kind of gameplay to an existing e-learning module. So for example, you can start to incorporate things like points and badges and time pressures and achievements and you know, missions and that sort of stuff that you can do really cheap and very cost effectively with a bit of good writing and a bit of tech, but in an existing authoring tool, like an e-learning authoring tool, as opposed to having to go and use some, you know, bespoke development engine.
And I think a good thing with this as well is it's a great way to get stakeholders excited. And I know we're going to cover that off in a second, but it's a great way to get people thinking about games and gamified learning and showing what's possible, I suppose. Yeah, it's a great way to do that.
Definitely. Yeah. So we have a poll that we wanted to put to everybody. So have you got a games project in mind right now? And if so, what size is it according to our terminology? So for example, is it are you thinking of a bite-sized game, premium game, flagship game, gamified e-learning, or you don't have one at all? And that's fine too. We'll just leave the poll open for a few seconds and hopefully get a couple of answers. I'm hoping that plenty of people on the call are going to have a games project that they're interested in.
Yeah, imagine if everyone says I don't have one.
Yeah.
I'm excited to see the results of this, actually. I'm quite intrigued.
Yeah. Let's I guess let's have a look at these results then. So I can't actually see that on my screen.
That's me, I've got it here. So we actually have a nice mix. So we've got about half of folks on the call don't have a game yet. So here just to learn about some gaming. About a third of folks are interested in having a bite-sized game. And then we've got about 10% that are interested in some of our premium or flagship games. And then gamified learning is coming in there at the end. So it looks like we've got a really nice mix on the screen here of folks that haven't experienced gamified learning all the way to some folks wanting to do some of these large scale flagship programs.
Okay, that's great. Well, we should really go on to our next question because I think that this last one is the one that we get asked a lot, that is going to really kind of help get people started with these projects. And a reminder that if you do have any questions that you want us to answer at the end, please do keep putting them in chat. But the final frequently asked question, how do I get buy-in from stakeholders? And Julia, I know there's a lot to this.
Yeah, I think stakeholder buy-in is really key, and we've kind of touched on that. right at the beginning we said about thinking about stakeholder mapping, but also thinking about who your stakeholders are. So I don't know if you remember, Zaki, Rich, when we kind of go through the stakeholder mapping, we think about the core team. So the team, the production team, the team that needs to be involved in every stage. And then we think about the strategic stakeholders as well, those that maybe just need to dip in and out at certain points. And I think that's really important because you don't want to overload stakeholders. You want to make sure that they're coming in at the right time and getting the right information, and that you're also, I suppose, talking to their interests. So there might be someone, I'm not sure, someone who is really into games, and that person you want to get involved right from the beginning. You want to harness that interest and make sure that they're, I suppose, champion the game internally. But then there'll also be some stakeholders who hold the budget only. They don't need to be involved in every single decision point. So you just bring them in at key stages. And I guess that's what we're showing here. We've got the strategic stakeholders and the production stakeholders. So Rich, do you have an example of where you'd bring in a strategic stakeholder and where maybe a production stakeholder?
Yeah, and just before what was still on the screen, I think that the thing that I'll just call out is that there's not just one or two places that you bring in stakeholders to get their buy-in. It's like a continuous process of getting their buy-in at the start and then keeping them brought in.
Especially if you're implementing the game in perhaps more of an agile methodology, right? Because then absolutely every sprint, it's the scope of it is evolving, right? And actually to bring them into the show and tells that we do at the end of every sprint, that's a great opportunity to get their buy-in.
Yeah, it's a great opportunity.
I think that's something to highlight here as well. So you've got the project phases, and that's where you want to bring in the stakeholders at different points. But that show and tell that Zaki just referenced. So what we do in that is we essentially show what we've built over that sprint. We show, it's quite visual. So it's a great point to bring in the strategic stakeholders to show them all of the work that we've done over the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, so that's every 2 weeks during production, isn't it?
Yeah. And then the game design document, I think, is another one, maybe.
Yeah, the game design document. Yeah, it's like where it comes to life, isn't it? And one of my favorite parts of doing any of these games projects is when we get in, well, this was obviously pre-COVID, but getting into a room with stakeholders and everyone who is involved from the client side, and just getting people doing stuff, answering questions, prototyping just with pen and paper, sticking dots on mood boards. The thing that I would take away is that most people play games in some form or another, and so you might think you've got a stakeholder, you might think there's some kind of stakeholder that's like sitting in an office somewhere, and they're far too busy and important to play games, but the chances are they actually do in some form or another, possibly mobile games even, or they certainly will have played games in the past. And so this is where clients can really get their senior stakeholders really interested and invested in the game design process. Get them giving you some ideas of how the game might be. I think I'm yet to be in a workshop with a client where a stakeholder hasn't had any design input into a game. They almost always do, because they do know they know about games and they play games.
Yeah. And I think that's where it comes to speaking to their interest as well, making sure that you're taking that into account, which you would do in these sorts of workshops as well.
Yeah. I promise
I'll move quicker through the next sections. But in the stakeholder buy-in, if I could give one piece of advice, it would be to get the IT team involved. I think maybe not so relevant for gamified learning and bite-sized learning, because they get delivered in the known infrastructure, the known architecture. But definitely if you're thinking of a premium game or a flagship game, get them involved really nice and early. They can absolutely be integral to successful delivery. And they will be thinking of security, they will be thinking of identity, they will be thinking of integration, they'll be thinking of analytics, all of those really interesting things that come with a complex architecture. And even the gateways and the processes that we need to go through in order to work with your IT teams. So get them involved nice and early. We'll put our arms around them, give them a big hug, and make sure they feel like part of that project team.
Yeah. Okay, let's talk about things we've learned, and let's do this section fairly quick, because I want to give us loads of time for questions. So the first thing we learned, categorically, I think for all of us will agree to this, is bring your map and compass. And what that means is know what your vision is. A client must know what their vision is, and we can help them direct that vision and use it as a way to make decisions throughout the entire course of the project. Keep referring back to what this vision is, and that will always help you make that tough decision. And there are plenty of tough decisions to make over the course of a project, right?
Yeah, definitely. And just to reiterate on that as well, that the vision is, of course, the game vision, but also the project vision as well. So we'll be setting out some principles around that. You wanted to move through it quickly?
yeah, we're going to get through it quickly. This is get your stuff together, get your house in order, basically. Go on, Julia.
Yeah, so I know I keep talking about the ways of working, but it is very important when you're getting into the thick of things and there's lots of, I suppose, work going on and decisions to be made, as well as having that vision. It's also really important to set out that ways of working. So if we come to a point where we don't know how to move forward, or we maybe need to look at an escalation or something like that, we have a decision process in place. It just makes sure that we're really following that path, like Rich mentioned on the vision slide a second ago. So setting that in stone isn't something that you want to do. You don't want to have it completely set and we never change. It's more a guideline, something that we set out at the beginning, but it evolves with us. So if we go back to that Flagship game, I mentioned that we moved and changed the style that we worked. And this is a good example of it shouldn't be set in stone, but a guide that we follow throughout. And then the final thing, just on the stakeholders. So we've mentioned about stakeholder mapping. So once you've got an idea of who your stakeholders are, the strategic and the production level, you can then look at their interest, their power and influence. And based on that, you can tailor your communication, when to bring them in, when to include them, how much information do they need, those sorts of things. So that's really important.
Yeah, I mean, I guess some of these things that you could say for any large project, but I think they're even more particularly true for games, because games are just they're complicated projects by their very nature, aren't they?
Definitely. And I think because there's a lot of visuals in it as well, I think that's something that actually influences it.
Yes, yeah, exactly. And it goes back to that thing of stakeholders who play games. They will be opinionated about things, and and often they can be very visual people as well. And so when they're seeing game visuals, a lot of these opinions start to come out. So this is when your ways of working your stakeholder maps is just so important. Zaki, I know you wanted to talk about planning the party early.
Yeah, so the sentiment behind this is think about the launch of the game. I think we go through months of hard work as a project team in order to get a really beautiful game, but actually that's not the hard part. The hard part is getting it out to all your users and getting your users excited by it. So it's really just about making sure that we're paying attention to this part of the project lifecycle early, making sure we're thinking about how it's going to launch, how you're going to market it, how you're going to communicate it, how you're going to get people excited to play it, how you're going to all of those exciting steps that get people playing it. Because the last
if we've just made
sorry, go on.
Well, no, I was going to say, if we, you were probably just going to say the same thing. Like, if we've made a multiplayer game, it's supposed to be a social learning experience. If we don't launch it properly and nobody's playing it, nobody wants to play a game that's got a 0 player base. So it's so important to get the launch comms and all of that stuff done really early.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, and there's some really cool things you can do here. I remember for one of the games, we all had the Zoom background, which was the game itself. So it all looked like we were sitting in the game. Exactly. It all looked like we were sat in the escape room. And then for another one, there was a big email campaign and some little sneak peeks, and we had a little trailer and animation. So I think planning it early is really important, like Zaki said. And that's something that we would do as well, is just guide you through that process, because it just, makes a big impact.
Yeah. Trusting the process. I mean, this sounds like probably more of one for you, Julia or Zaki.
So I can start. And again, it's more relevant for the premium and the flagship games. But obviously, in an agile methodology, we're not going to do a design phase where you work out everything to the nth degree up front. You're going to take decisions all the way through the production. And I think obviously there is some, compared to building a piece of learning content, it is a slightly different, methodology. It's the same methodology that we would use for software development in general. So actually, it's just about trusting the process. It's about thinking more agilely, making sure that if there are decisions to be made, we make them at the right time, that we don't bog ourselves down about decisions that we don't need to make for a little bit of time. So it's just about trusting the process and the agile methodology, that we will absolutely build the right product that is right for everybody, and we'll do that in collaboration. But it is a slightly different process to perhaps building just a piece of learning content.
Yeah.
This is my favorite one.
Because of the pizza.
Because of the pizza, yes. So I guess the overriding sort of message here is that games projects, they are complicated and there's a lot to do. And this was just a photo that we took from I think it was one of the flagship games, I think, Zaki, when you and I were in London and we were doing the visioning workshop with the client, and we had to do some wireframes, and we were there after the main session. We kind of ran a session with just us two and the project lead on the client side, and we just kind of thrashed out all these wireframes, and we were there for ages. And I would have really loved a pizza or some Chinese food or something like that, because we were working well late into the night, weren't we?
Yeah, and I think it ties nicely in with that trust the process bit, right? It's just about the fact that there will be some extreme collaboration at different points in time, and if there is a moment where we need to really flesh something out, we will be there. We will be in the room. Well, pre-COVID, we were in the room. We'll sit down. We'll make sure we get to the right answer for everybody. And sort of the sentiment is, we'll order the pizza, right? We're all in it together.
Next time we'll order the pizza. It's really important to, or something that I remember so much, is we're not always right, and it's a really important thing to say and to remember, that we're not always right. You can go the number of times when I've thought, doing a design for a learning game, you think this is definitely what we should be doing, this is how it should work, this is what the user experience should be like, and then you test it and you get humbled because you realize that actually users want to do this instead, or users prefer A over B, and you were convinced that they prefer B over A. And I guess like the underlying message here is test, just test early, test often, and really listen to what people have to say. Because if I think I said it earlier, that you've got to design a game with a player in mind, and if the players are telling you that they want this and they don't want that, there's no use not listening to them. You've got to really get your head into their feedback and adjust accordingly.
And I think that's also why we recommend Agile over Waterfall if possible, because it gives us that chance naturally within the process to get that feedback and to build on it. So rather than designing everything up front based on a set of assumptions that we've made, we actually just build a little bit, review it, get feedback, build the next bit. So you're really going through that test and building based on the direct feedback that we're getting, rather than some ideas that we've got. So I think that's the best way to go. And there's also options if there are, or if there is a need for a specific timeline, we can do, dare I say the word, Wagile, which is like waterfall mixed with agile. I don't know if that's official, but there's some things that we can do to flex essentially, so we can still stick to specific timelines whilst also working in an agile way.
I hadn't heard of Wagile until
if
that
it's
second.
not been coined,
I haven't heard it for a while.
I regret hearing it.
It goes no further than this group.
Yeah. Okay, so we obviously blitzed through that pretty quick, but we did want to get to any questions. So, Elizabeth, have you seen any questions coming up that we can try and answer now?
Yeah, we've got a couple here. So the first one that we've got that I think would be good is obviously learning games are a big investment. How do we work with you to evaluate the effectiveness of games when we build them?
I think that you need to start with that in mind and build it into the game's design from the outset, so you know what you want to measure and you know what kinds of metrics can support your measurement strategy. And measurement strategy is also something that we do all the time with our clients, with non-game projects as well. So we can support from that point of view. I think, Zaki, if I recall, on the last flagship project we did, we really tooled up Gomo, didn't we? Which was we used Gomo as the basis for the SCOs which went into the game, and we really tooled it up in terms of being able to give a fine grain level of detail for XAPI reporting.
Yeah, it's for me. The technical resolution to that is analytics, right? It's the interactions and the statements that are generated from the game to something central that we can look at. Definitely in the gamified and the bite-size arena, it comes down to XAPI. It comes down to making sure that you are tracking the interactions that are important to you as a business, whether it's about how many people have played something, whether it's about how many people have got something right, how many people have interacted with it, how long they're interacting with it. We need to be able to understand all of that upfront nice and early so that we can ensure that you've got those foundations in the framework. And then all of that gets sort of thrown out to a learning record store, where we can start to slice and dice it, and you can start to see, this week 1,000 people have played, and 300 people have completed 5 pieces of interaction and things. So you start to build out that kind of view from the analytics. And you can always add to that over time, absolutely. But if you have that information up front, you can build it into the foundations, and that will support the narrative around return of investment.
It's about building that chain of evidence, isn't it? Because you can, for example, one thing you can look at is how are people performing in the game from the start of their play experience to the to the midpoint, to the end, for example, and see their progress over time within the game. And then there's the other level, which is looking at how they're actually performing on the job after having played the game, and of course, before as well. So there's different levels of evaluation and analysis that you can do to show that return on the investment. And we always advise clients to bake that in to the overall experience.
In one of the frameworks I'm working on at the moment, we have 3 kind of personas interested in that information. We had people that were involved with kind of marketing stats, and how many people have played this week, how often is it we played, how many people logged in, that kind of stuff. We had people interested in learning analytics, so how many people have consumed a piece of content, how well have they done at that piece of content, who's getting them right, who's getting them wrong. And the final one was it's a global competition, so it was about who's at the top of the leaderboard, who's the best performer for that week, who's the best performer in that retailer. So there was kind of 3 personas that we identified, and we created a measurement strategy around each of those personas, and then made sure that the game framework could support that.
And that then, of course, also then helps maintain stakeholder buy-in throughout that process, because you're thinking about it right at the beginning, you're making sure that those people that are interested are aware of it, and then you're keeping them updated as you're going through. So I think that's really critical as well.
Sure. Yeah, it really helps if you could tie the gameplay and mirror it really closely to the behaviors that you want people to be doing in their day-to-day work. So for example, if the focus of the game, if the behavioral intent for the game is to get people selling more things, if you can tie the reporting strategy back from, for example, Salesforce, and you can look at people who've played the game and their performance in Salesforce before and after, then that's a really compelling piece of evidence to show return.
So we can do, so we've done that with organizations before, where actually the game has sent all of their analytics to a learning record store, and then we've taken a different feed of information from something like Salesforce into that learning record store as well, which allows us to build that picture. It might not all come from the game, like Rich was saying, it might come from multiple avenues, but we want to centralize that traffic so that it can then be reported on.
Perfect. We've got one more question if you guys are up for it.
Yeah, sure thing.
I'm interested in learning games, but I have a restrictive budget. Any advice on how they could get started?
It depends how restrictive your budget is. It's like we're saying in the middle section of the slides, the starting point is probably gamified e-learning. If you've got a piece of e-learning for a particular need and you want to inject a bit of gaminess into it, then there are things that we can do from a design point of view there to make it that bit more compelling, that bit more engaging, a bit more sticky with people. Start incorporating things like, there's the stuff you can do like points and timers and badges, and then there's the more narrative stuff you can do, like give people just write in a quest, write in a mission or an objective for people, and make it just in general feel a bit more like an adventure as opposed to just clicking through some content. And that's a really easy way to get started. Alternatively, if you've got a bit more to spend, then you can start looking at one of what we would call a bite-sized game, which is then you're kind of out of the realms of e-learning into more of a proper game, a learning game, but on a budget that is I guess that is more forgiving if you haven't got the money to spend on a premium or flagship game, and that's, I think, a really great place to start.
Is there anything in there around frameworks or anything?
Yes, thank you for leading me to talk about frameworks. Yeah, so if I think we started touching on it before, where we said that we'd done some work with a client to create a framework that was then reusable for subsequent games. So even though the initial investment for the first game was that bit higher, then the client was able with us to reuse that framework to do several other games with the same technology underpinning it. So even though we reskinned it so it looked like a different game, we rewrote it so it had different content and it had a different kind of narrative to the game. It was underneath the hood, it was using the same framework. And so those subsequent games after the first one had been developed were significantly cheaper for the client.
Yeah.
So if you've got like
quicker.
Yeah, so if you've got a program of, if you're thinking, I'd kind of like, maybe 3, 4, 5 games eventually, that's something that you could look into to quite significantly reduce the investment of the overall, if you're just able to then spend a bit more on the first one.
Yeah, and in that example as well, what we did is run it in a waterfall process. So it is about getting all of the requirements up front, narrowing them down quite significantly, and making sure that we're very clear on exactly the detail, like the look and feel, the user journey, everything. And then we go into development, and then we do a round of testing, and basically following that approach means that we can really tailor down as well and narrow down the cost as well. And one thing that we do quite often is that maybe a client will come to us with an investment with a figure, and then we'll share a proposal based on what we can do within that. And then even throughout that process, every single time maybe there's a new idea, we would look at that idea and say, okay, we can't maybe do this option, but these are the other options that we could take and different routes that we could do, and look at how we can make it impactful. So it's really about not just getting an idea and saying no, but saying like, right, okay, what are the different options and routes that we can take? So that's something that we do quite often, and that keeps the cost down as well.
Perfect. We've got one more here. In your experience, are there any industries where learning games seem to work better or worse?
That's a good question. Better or worse? I'm struggling to think of an industry where they work any worse than the others. I mean, I guess a game, especially when you're talking about multiplayer games, people instantly think of competitive multiplayer games, and in that situation, the first thing that comes to mind quite often is sales audiences and product knowledge. So obviously not an industry, but a kind of a use case. People tend to think that sales audiences are highly competitive, and often they are, and so they do thrive on that sense of competition you get from a multiplayer game, which is why, for instance, our Genius game, which is a framework, it does go down really well when you mix it into a product knowledge sales based environment, because in that game people can compete against each other, so that is a really good use case. And what I've been talking to people about more recently is also trying to think of multiplayer games as being not just competitive, but also collaborative and cooperative. And I think this is a really, really nice angle for learning games to take, where instead of competing against each other, people are working together with each other to achieve an objective. And I think that would be a really nice use case when you've got some soft skills to develop. But to answer the question about industry, I haven't seen examples of it not working well. We have some really nice examples of it going really well in financial services.
It's part of the importance of the visioning piece, right? Where you're creating all those mood boards, because I think every organization is culturally different, and actually the game has to be tailored for that customer and the culture of their audience, right? You know, if they are more into competition than a game, you know, you position it as a competition and you make sure the art direction and the mood and the ambition of the game is all based around competition. If they are, you know, even down to the tone of the visuals and things can influence whether it's successful or not. So I think that visioning piece at the front is really important, and then the UAT piece that happens all the way through the project, you know, getting user buy-in to art direction, paper prototyping, sprint deliverables. You know, you start to get the temperature of the people that you want to play this game, and I think that can help make it successful. Is, you know, some might like something quite sci-fi, and others might like something very reality-based. And I think, you know, we've done the spectrum of all of them, but they're very, very tailored to individual organizations and the culture of the audience.
Yeah. Okay, I think we are about at time. We would love to, if anyone's got any more questions, we'd love to answer them. You can send them through to talk-to-us@leolearning.com. You can send them to either me or Elizabeth. Anytime you can get in touch. So I will sign off from me and the rest of the panel and say thanks very much for all your time. Elizabeth, is there anything that you wanted to finish off with?
No, it's been a pleasure, and you know, it's been a very great learning experience.
Cool. If you are still on the line and you want any more inspiration for game design and anything to do with designing games for learning, then please take a look at the links that were posted earlier on in chat. There's loads of stuff on the Leo Learning website. There's stuff coming up as well, more webinars and discussion panels and things like that, white papers and so on. So from me, thanks very much, and Julia and Zaki as well.
Yes, thank you.
Thanks everyone for joining us. See you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks, bye.